Hi, human science must be originated from human life. There are some areas in the world that are really very interesting approaches and ideas come about human sciences. Latin America is one of these places. Latin America is a places where the idea of liberation theology and liberation psychology emerged. Today I would like to talk about liberation psychology. Liberation psychology is a new field of psychology which originated from Latin America. The founder of liberation psychology is Ignacio Martin Baro. Ignacio Martin Baro was a Jesuit priest. He lived most of his life in Salvador. And he developed the idea of liberation theology, liberation psychology. Liberation psychology is the main legacy of Ignacio Martin Baro. Unfortunately, Martin Baro was murdered in 1989. He is the man, Martin Baro is the man who dedicated his life for justice, for equality, and peace. Martin Baro, he is a psychologist as well as a theologian. And he developed a very important approach regarding psychology. His approach has been formulated as liberation psychology. Of course, he borrowed many ideas from liberation theology, but in the light of liberation theology and other development, he formulates very important idea which help us to see psychology from different perspective. The question is what we can learn from liberation psychology of Ignacio Martin Barros. As I said, liberation psychology, the birthplace of liberation psychology is Latin America. Latin America has a colonial past, and this colonial past creates many problems in this region. So, liberation psychology is an attempt which try to understand the problems which emerged which emerged in Latin America could be understood from psychological point of view if psychology become a psychological praxis. So liberation psychology transform psychology. Liberation psychology makes psychology as a psychological praxis which understands and intervenes the social psychological problems, social psychological and political and social problems of society. So liberation psychology brings psychological knowledge in dialogue with social and political problems like inequality, exclusion, poverty, war, violence. So these problems, they are not main problems in mainstream psychology. But this problem, the problem of poverty, the problem of inequality, the problem of oppression, the problem of violence, they are the chief problems, the chief subjects of liberation psychology. And liberation psychology is not just doesn't have the idea of individual as an isolated entity. Individual psychology of individual must be understood in the context where he or she lives in. Particularly in a context in a context where violence, where war, where injustices and oppression prevails, personality of human individual heavily will be influenced by all these factors. So, and psychological problems of individual, they are not individual in nature. They are political and social. Injustices, violence, war makes people very traumatic. So, trauma people are experiencing are the result of violence, war, injustices, and oppressions. So, in order to heal the traumas of human individual, we must heal these injustices, oppressions, and violence in society. As long as violence, oppression, injustices, inequalities continue in society, all these traumas will continue. So, the relationship between individual and psychologist, the relationship between individual and counselor cannot be limited within the room. Psychologist, counselor, therapist must leave their room. They must go into society and they must actively work against injustices, against oppression, against violence, against war. If they practice psychology as a psychological praxis in the street within society, they could help people to heal their trauma. So, psychology must be a psychological action. So, psychologists and counselors must intervene to the life of people. So this is a very important message we are learning from Martin Baro's legacy. The other important idea we can learn from liberation psychology is this. Liberation psychology tries to make people to be aware of the problems, tries to make people deeply and really be aware of the problem of oppression, the problem of injustices, the problems of violence. In most cases, many people are not aware of what they are experiencing. They just suppose that violence is their destiny. All these injustices, all these inequalities are their destinies. Liberation psychology say that no, they are not your destiny. You can't see these problems as normal because they are not normal. Then why you see all this problem as normal? Because you are in the state of mental slavery. So, liberation psychology tries to liberate people from mental slavery. So, liberation from mental slavery is the main or central objective of liberation psychology. So, liberation psychology is not just an academical discipline. It is a psychological praxis in the street, in every part of the life, because liberation psychology consider psychological praxis as a way of activity which aims to transform real social conditions, real political conditions into better ones. So, liberation psychology is about liberation, is about reality. At the same time, it is about the transformation of reality. Uh, uh, Liberation psychology said that it is not right to accept all knowledge have been produced by the establishment of powers. It said that it is not power centers or the authorities of power are not our references. We have to understand and involve and practice psychology within social movement. We have to understand the conscience of people and how these people can organize themselves against oppression, against inequality, and so on. So, this is a very important point because mainstream Western psychology basically understand human individual as an uh, as an isolated being. As we said before, liberation psychology understands the reality of human individual within the context of political and social realities. And also, liberation psychology values historical experiences. History matters. So, human individual must be understood in the light of human, in the light of social, political, and historical experiences. And liberation psychology doesn't blame human individuals for their problems, for their traumas. Liberation psychology doesn't blame a person in Salvador, in Uruguay, in other part of South America. Say, you are the source of the problem. No. Liberation psychology said that you are the victim. As a victim, I am not going to blame you, but I am going to blame political and historical powers which force you to live under these traumatic conditions. So, uh, what finally the point I would like to make about liberation psychology, it is a critical psychology. It is critical in the sense that it has a critical approach against Western psychology, North psychology, or Ignace Martin Baro said a North psychology. It is a critical. It involves a critical approach against psychology of North America and Western Europe. Liberation psychology, it is a praxis. It is a living experience in the street, not in the rooms. Critical liberation psychology, it is not a comfortable psychology. It invites psychology to leave their comfort zone and to organize society in order to liberate people from oppression, from injustices, uh, from violence, from wars. So, liberation psychology, it is a praxis, it is a action, and liberation psychology, it is about society. Liberation psychology requires the involvement of all society. Liberation psychology can be practiced only within society, not in the rooms of psychologists or counselors or university classes. It is the streets. It is psychology in life. It is psychology in streets. Every part of social life, it is the place for liberation psychology. So, liberation psychology, it is about people and it is about society. Thank you.